So yeah, thank you so much, Victoria, and it's brilliant to be here. I've been to Creative Mornings before, and it is such, well, I think a lot of it's about the community that's created and a lot of enthusiasm this early in the morning, which is amazing. And also, yeah, it's so cool to be part of this global communication of creativity. So I'm excited to share. So the theme this month is context, and I've decided to talk in two parts, really. One is, what's the context for my life or one's life? And then also, what's the context for all of our lives, and I would argue our civilization. So quite a big second topic.
For 9 a.m.
So this is, as Victoria mentioned, I call myself a polymath in training, always moving from one discipline to the next. And this is kind of all the things I've done since uni. I'm not going to go through every one, but I finished my physics degree. Along the way, I ended up doing science, art, journalism. I worked with my dad to develop some apps for our farm, so I became an app developer. I co-founded something called Tech for Good Global. I was a user researcher at Government Digital Service for a while. So, and finally, I have been a co-founder of VitaCycle Tech Apps, which is what I work on with Inti, and help run my family's farm and sell our wine here and create a podcast called Farmerama. So that's by no means linear. It's been all over the place, and for a long time I taught maths and physics to support a lot of that. So just wanted to give you some background. And when I talk about the context for all of that, I wanted to draw out kind of 4 insights that have allowed me to weave and change and be pursuing all of those at the same time. So the first one is follow your curiosities, don't search for your passion. When I left university, everyone said, oh, it's fine, just find your passion. Go for your passion and you'll love it. And I thought, oh God, what's my passion? And then you end up sort of madly searching for a passion. And I think that's actually a real drain on life. And so the more empowering way to be is follow your curiosities. And I have to say, it's Elizabeth Gilbert who first kind of clarified this concept for me. And by following your curiosities, as a polymath in training, I was able to follow many different disciplines and paths. I was interested in art, science, tech, fashion, all these different things, and I just kept pursuing them. And as I said, at the same time, I taught maths and physics, and I do think there is something to say about following your curiosities and having something in the background that you can fall back on to make money if you have to. Because it's difficult to follow all your curiosities if you're also stressing about where your money is going to come from or how you're going to live. So I do think that's an important part of it. Second one, reach into the void. So this is a massive theme in my life. Basically, I've multiple times created whole new kind of tracks in life just by reaching out to someone who I had no connection to with whatsoever. A completely new drop in the ocean, as you might say. So I'll give you a few examples. The first one was after leaving uni, I got in touch with, or I found Super Collider online. It was like on page 8 of Google search. And I emailed the person who appeared to be running it, called Chris, and said, I'm free on Fridays, can I come help? And he got back to me. And that ended up being a 3 to 4 year journey of learning how to be a journalist and taking people on big adventures. And it was, an amazing start to life, really. And then another one was, I had done scientific coding in my degree, but I'd never done commercial coding. And I tried to teach myself, and it's very difficult to code if you don't have someone to ask questions to when you get stuck. And so I read around a lot online, and I got quite enthused by something called test-driven development. and started reading loads of articles about that. And then I decided I was going to just contact the people who'd written those articles and see if they would meet up with me and answer some of my questions. And one of them got back to me in London, and we met up, and then for a year, he met with me almost every week to answer my questions and help me develop these apps. And I mean, I could not have done it without that. That was so vital. And yeah, so thanks, Mike. And then the third example is a lady called Cassie, who both Victoria and I know. And she was doing an event about intimacy at the Barbican. I liked what they said online, so I went along and met up with her and just said, oh, can I be involved? And nothing happened at the time. But then a few months later, I ended up on a cycle ride with her and kind of pursued her again. And finally, she met with me. And then, she's become definitely one of the most influential people in my life today. Like, she was the one who brought me into the Tech for Good Global. She helped me get the job at Government Digital Service. And now Victoria and I are members of something called the Point People. So I guess the key to all three of those people is I had no idea who they were, no connections, and reached out to them, and something massive came from them. And I must also say that I actually obviously emailed loads of people in that time. And there's a lot of people who don't get back, and that's fine. But it's just important to start reaching beyond what you know, I guess. Okay, next slide. Oh, yes. This one is probably one of the most recent ones for me. For years, I was reading around, like online, all that stuff about productivity, and if you're going to be a good founder, you better have an amazing morning routine. And I don't have morning routines. Yeah, except Creative Mornings. Sorry, Victoria. I've never, ever been able to, I tried to do a morning routine, and then I couldn't stick to it, and then I just made myself feel bad that I wasn't sticking to it. I'll never be the good person. I can't do this. And then I spoke to a lady earlier this year who just totally changed my perspective on this, and she said, well, daily routines are one thing, but actually many women work on 28-day routines or 28-day cycles. And I thought, oh, yeah. And so I went back and started to track my 28-day cycles. And actually, I'm incredibly predictable on a 28-day cycle. Incredibly. It's amazing. So I can now see that there's times of the month when I know that I'll be getting up later, and I'll be working less hard, maybe doing more writing, staying at home, talking less to people. And then there's other times when I work a lot. I get up really early, and I'm really, really on it and productive. And by working with that cycle, I've just created, there's a whole new level of power in my life. And it's amazing. And I can't, it's really transformative for me. So I'm not saying all of you have 28-day cycles, but I guess what I realized is it's really about your own rhythm and finding what, tracking what works for you. There is no set script for what works. So I don't think it's about morning routines. I think it's about your routine. What works for you? Okay. And then this one, it may seem a bit wishy-washy on the surface, but it's really helped me immensely at many different points in my life. I think when I say bring integrity, I guess I mean it's like being really true to yourself. Like listening to your gut and what it's saying inside and really sticking to that. And often I think that leads to beauty. Beauty for me being like laughter, joy, feeling really good about things, even like sadness, but enjoying sadness. And so I'll give you an example recently. Becoming a CEO, I started to think like, oh gosh, do I have to work 80 hours a week? And do I have to become a bit of a tyrant to make this happen, to be a success? Because a lot of the success stories out there or that's sort of the startup model. And there were times when I thought, okay, yeah, I'm going to just, now it's over. I've just got to compromise on my integrity and just go for it. But stuck with it a little longer, and then started to have more and more conversations with people who really inspired me to see that actually you don't need to do that. There are other ways. And it was just so re-ingrained in me, really, that integrity and sticking to what you feel is right is so important. And if you can really stick to that, that's so powerful again. Hopefully that was clear. Okay, so those were kind of the 4 things that have taken me on this polymath journey, the themes, maybe you might say, and sort of core to who I am. The second part is all about, okay, so those are the contexts for a personal life. But what is the context for all of our lives and our civilization? And I would argue that what I've come to is that actually it's farming. Obviously, there's a few other things, but soil, water, air, and really farming is what looks after those in much of the world. So I think next slide. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey into some of the realizations I had around farming and why I care about farming. Because I actually grew up in Cheshire and looked out over fields of sheep and cows every morning and thought, wow, farming looks boring. And really old-fashioned, and I just wasn't enthused at all. And then I fast forward a little 10, 20 years, and this is where my journey really started. Was 10 years ago, my parents and my family moved to Chile and started growing olives and grapes. You hear me? And I started to have a completely different experience of farming. On the one hand, it's full of joy and beauty, like drinking wine that you've made with your own hands, or tasting olive oil that you've created is so cool, or eating potatoes straight out of the ground. Try it, they taste completely different. But then also farming, there's sort of a deep anxiety there at all times as well, because there's lots of unknowns, risks and losses to come. We had repeated frosts that were killing back the olive trees year after year. So it was just difficult to see how that was going to work. And then we had a real setback at the beginning of this year when we had the fires came in Chile and basically burnt everything. So those things, in farming, you live on the edge of the realities of our world, or our natural world, and you're always having to deal with that. So it's not all joy and beauty, is what I'm trying to say, but there is a lot there. So I began to visit many farms through creating the apps and also through doing the podcast Farmerama. And what I realized was that actually the everyday decisions farmers are making affect us all so much more than we know. And I'm going to give you some examples. So the first one is, oh, can we go back one? Sorry. If a farmer decides to cut down trees, then that can actually help cause flooding in the nearby town. So, if for whatever reason, maybe they had a frost that year, they don't have a crop, they need to make some money, they have to cut down some trees, then actually that's putting the local towns at risk, potentially. Or in this case, this farm, they're planting trees to help prevent flooding. Or another example is if farmers decide they have to plant a monoculture, or say a whole field of wheat, then actually that is bad for the soils, because it degrades soils, basically. I don't know if you heard Michael Gove say a few weeks ago that we only have 30 to 40 years left of harvests in our soils in the UK. So that's quite a short time. And so the way to regenerate soils is actually to plant diverse crops. And so I guess what I'm saying is that by farmers choosing to plant a single crop, that's essentially shortening the life of harvests in our country. So a pretty simple decision, pretty big impact. And then the final example is how farmers choose to graze. There's more and more evidence that shows that if farmers graze their animals like as a herd, like they were grazed on the savannah, then actually grasses grow really fast. And when grasses grow, they take carbon from the atmosphere and put it into the soil. So the quicker the grasses are growing, the more carbon you're taking out of the atmosphere and putting into the soil. So if farmers, like this farmer Ian Boyd, decide to graze their cattle in this way, then they're capturing more carbon, which also affects us all. So he actually does graze in that way, and you can see, like the ground, it looks incredibly lush. It's quite insane. So I guess my realization there, and what maybe is interesting for all of you, is that day-to-day decisions or year-to-year decisions that farmers make actually impact us all in many different ways. It's not just food. And also, just to remember, farmers make food, fuel, and fiber. So cotton, wool, they make biofuels. So it's all kind of linked, is what I would say. So yeah, I think the insight there is that the root of sustainability in many ways lies in farmers' hands. And the sooner we realize this and start to work with that and support farmers, the better off we'll be. And then the next realization I had was that I read this book, The Third Plate, by Dan Barber, who's a New York-based chef. And he just made it really clear that farmers only grow or produce what we demand. I mean, that sounds really obvious, but it really hit home. And he's very clever about it. And he says that actually what chefs can do and what we can all do is if we start to create plates that look like an ecological farm, so directly reflect that grazing pattern or a biodiverse crop on your plate, then you are actually supporting that type of farming. So I'll give you some examples. Maybe that's quite an abstract concept. So one of the things he talks about in his book is something called rotation risotto. Not quite here yet, but that's okay. And he basically creates a risotto that's made up of 3 different grains and cow pea shoots, PEA shoots. And what's amazing about that is that that is a rotation of crops for a farmer, and the cow pea shoots are actually a cover crop. So it means that he is using every aspect of that ecological farming method on the plate when he creates that dish. And so he's supporting the farmer to grow all of those things. I just think that's so clever and so cool. So any chefs out there, this is a great opportunity. And then this lady is another example of that. She's called Kimberly Bell, based in Nottingham at the Small Food Bakery. She's a baker. And she has been working with farmers in the UK who are growing a diverse wheat. There's like over 20 different varieties in there. And it's quite difficult as a baker to work with that flour because it's a little bit unpredictable. But she's made it her kind of mission to make loaves from that biodiverse wheat. And it's insanely tasty. You've probably never tasted anything like it. And so by buying those loaves of bread, people are essentially supporting farmers to plant a diverse crop. And I just think that's so exciting as well. So, and actually E5 Bakery in London does the same, if you want something closer to home, or similar things. So I guess, obviously, none of us are well, I shouldn't say that. Many of us aren't farmers, and we live in a city, and we don't intend to start farming every day. So why is this? How can we engage with all this stuff and support this ecological future? And there's a few ways, I think, that are pretty low-key. First one is, obviously, you should listen to our podcast, Farmerama, which is, we share the stories of like 4 to 5 different farmers each month, weave the stories together, so you literally hear the farmer's voice. And it's quite fun, and you'll definitely learn some new things and ideas. And there's other blogs out there, something called Indie Farmer, Agricology. So, you can really listen to the stories from the farmers, because it's really not simple. I maybe made it seem simple, but it's actually not. And another way to get involved is co-farming. One example of that is a project we created called Our Field. 42 of us from London area co-invested in a field in Hertfordshire with farmer John Cherry, who you can see there. And we do all of the decision-making online through a forum, and he then does the actual farming. And I think it's such a beautiful project because I feel like I'm able to contribute to the British farming landscape without owning any land, which I can't afford. And from my home in London, although I do go visit the field quite often because it's quite fun. But that's okay, people can do that too. And yeah, it's an amazing project, and you really learn the life of a farmer and what it takes to grow food, which is quite a lot. We're still trying to sell our grain now, if anyone wants to buy some spelt. There are other things like community-supported agriculture. There's growing communities in London, and there's many different things like that around where you can also be involved in a farm. And then finally, there's loads of farmers on Twitter. So we may have all left Twitter mainly, but actually if you get back on Twitter, you can really access the farming community. And Instagram. It's so cool. Many farmers are on Instagram, and they're actually selling their produce direct through Instagram. So you can buy meat direct from people who would call themselves carbon farmers, people who are sequestering carbon. And that's a really amazing way to support that farming style and community. So I just wanted to end. Can we just go back one? Sorry. So hopefully I made it clear how and why I've realized that farming is the context for our future and how we can all engage, and hopefully you have a bit of a sense of that as well. I think it's important to acknowledge that the era of genetically modified wheats and monocultures of feedlots and of chemical-intensive agriculture is now becoming old-fashioned, and it's really on its way out. And it's a really exciting time to be talking to and working with the farming community. We're in a new dawn of a more ecological farming era, where farmers are really looking to work with nature and the whole system. And I think we're all part of it in some way, and we can all be part of it. Farming is soil science, it's simple digital technologies, it's working with nature, it's about communities, it's about food cultures, it's about rural-urban connections. I haven't found how it's about fashion yet, but I continue to wear my leopard print leggings in hope when I visit farms, and maybe one day. Yeah, I guess it's an invitation for everyone to get involved in whatever way you want, and to just kind of think about maybe where your food, where your fiber, and where your fuel comes from, and support the farming community, the ecological farming community. Thank you so much.